I don't think I can enthuse quite hard enough about Shropshire. Yeah, this holds such a unique place in my heart. The first year we ever did this, by the time we were driving home, I was basically, nope, turn this car around. I don't care that we've both got work tomorrow. Just want to do all of that over again right now. But go home we did, and in the intervening year, I found a bunch of sites I hadn't clocked before, and then the following year, couldn't resist. There were still a number of hill forts to catch, plus any more bits of church crawling. I mean, I'd take any excuse at this point. The third year, we actually brought a small group with us, which made a nice change. And this year just gone, we were there, but it was a little different, so maybe that'll be a different episode. Well, okay, why Shropshire in autumn? It's a lot of things. I mean, leaves turning is one. To be more exact, we've always done these in the October half term, roughly the end of October, maybe inching into the first days of November, which is where the good colour is really coming through in England without the winds of November stripping the leaves away. But while Shropshire has these incredibly dramatic hills and ridgelines, they look even more remarkable when wreathed in mist. This has occasionally backfired, and yeah, I certainly wouldn't hate being there in summer, but it just seems to work incredibly for autumn. Now, we have a lot to cover. However, it's a little difficult to know how to organise this episode, as it's actually a mash of those 3 years I described. There are some trips I've never made episodes for. I mean, Ireland springs to mind. We covered loads in Northern Ireland and then headed south into the Republic. Saw some great things, and I've had similar trips with my folks around, say, Northumberland and into the Scottish borders. So what's the issue? Well, it has a lot to do with the way I put trips together. You see, this is our map of the UK. We've flashed this up before. Green is to do, blue is done, red and yellow are other categories. Now, what this often means, I have so many potential pins to hit that on a given trip, we're often just going to whichever pins we can get to in time, but these are a whole mix of hill forts, ruined abbeys, standing stones, ancient churches. It's a bit of a mashup of things generally in excess of 800 years old, and it also means we're doing a trip that makes little sense to a lot of people. It seems to lack much of a theme other than ancient things that people post on Blue Sky. Follow us on Blue Sky, you might start to get an idea of what we mean. Anyway, the lack of theme is at risk of making the choices for our trips somewhat unintelligible for a lot of people. In this specific case, though, having done Shropshire throughout 4 years, if you count this just gone, I feel like we've managed a pretty good cross-section of the place. And bear in mind, it's a pretty large county, and particularly as you get west, the roads, I mean, it's not cart ruts in the dirt, but the roads do get thinner, slower, and further, and it does slow progress considerably. Also, don't be mad, because we have to drive here from Bournemouth, we do of course catch some bits along the way to break up the trip, so I will be smuggling in some things from Herefordshire, Worcestershire, just all along the Welsh marches, and even into the Cotswolds. Okay, well, enough provisos, let's roll an intro. Okay, first year. Well, on this day, we are starting from quite far back. In fact, we've only just barely made it across the Dorset border at this stage. But the beautiful autumn day we had, and having never been there before, we had a great morning at Stourhead. This is a bit of a photographer's paradise. It's a landscape specifically sculpted to give certain views, and goodness knows other photographers with far better gear have done a much better job of this than the footage you're seeing. But given what a lovely day it was, I could hardly feel too hard done by. There's various follies. I have mixed feelings on these, but I think this is somewhere you do have to do at least once. Now, we're going back a handful of years now. If I recall, at the time, this cost us £18 per adult. A quick check shows it has now jumped to 23. I'm not going to be drawn on how organisations like the National Trust should or shouldn't be run, but this price point does feel like a bit of a slap in the face, especially if you didn't see it coming. I mean, £46 for 2 adults is a lot to just see a nice garden. Now, of course, the goal here is to imply that it's your fault that you haven't paid more for your annual membership, you silly sausage. Which is the same argument as they've got a great deal on pianos if you buy a 4-pack. Anyway, this is made doubly amusing by this sign placed almost sarcastically on the way out. Sorry, for a family of 4, this is £69 for a maybe 90-minute lap of a garden. There are not an inconsiderable number of families in the UK for whom £69 is a food budget for a fortnight. But no, congratulate yourselves on how accessible... Okay, this is too angry for this early in the episode, and believe it or not, I don't actually have some big thing about the National Trust overall, but this did irk me. I'm not sure if Olivia intended for everyone to be placed in quote marks like that. Right, well, we did just get blown around at the top of White Sheet Camp. That's a large hill fort on the ridge opposite, and we were on our way. Pleasant though all this is, I'm anticipating folks starting to click away if we're not at the very least in the Welsh Marches shortly. This was our first exploration of Cirencester. Wow, this really is a long time ago. We've done a lot since then. To not dance around the point, this first trip was in the year of our Lord 2022. However, since most of the things we're going to be showing you have been in the British landscape for at least 800 years or much longer, the amount of time between filming and showing them to you does seem somewhat trivial. Cirencester has a wealth of Roman things, including a rather brilliant museum, but particularly this very pleasing to look at amphitheatre, which, while entirely turf, is still very nice when viewed from above. But after a good amount of time in Cirencester, we didn't actually have lots of light left, so did at this point head straight for Shropshire. The sun had just about set when we arrived, but we did have enough light to get a first look at Ludlow. What an incredible town. Of course, the castle takes pride of place, but it has this hill just to the west, which gives you a gorgeous view over all of it. Gonna just take a moment to let this footage play. Well, our accommodation for this extended weekender was this shepherd's hut. Now, call me, I don't know, whatever disparaging term springs to mind first. I loved this. Jen was somewhat more tepid on it. I know there is nothing remotely authentic about these shepherd's huts. These are quite a common fixture for people looking to do a sideline in Airbnb on, say, the edge of their farm somewhere. They're a lot less ugly than a normal caravan. I just don't care. I thought this was nice. It was pretty cozy, actually. We won't go into much depth of the food we had on these trips. We're not in the budget bracket to be fancy, and to be honest, I'm normally camera down after dark anyway, just to give myself a break. So up the next day, headed into Ludlow for a quick coffee. It's particularly charming for its timbered medieval buildings, of which there are several. However, we didn't linger long as our first stop was here. Okay, Stokesay Castle. This one is pretty great. You can see it doesn't quite have the form of the usual shape we doodle for castles. Well, part of it does. It was built as a fortified manor between 1280 to 90 by a wool merchant from Ludlow. The gatehouse is later from about 1640. Once inside, the wooden cruck roof in the Great Hall is very enjoyable, and there's little great details you can catch all around the site. What was a particular treat was how moody it was. The mist over the hill opposite, vibes were immaculate all the way down. Far too many nice shots I could insert in this bit. However, while the mist giveth when you're in the valleys, it also taketh away if you want to see, maybe a hilltop enclosure. So yes, Burrow Camp, a smudge in a blur factory. However, heading a little way down the road, we were far more fortunate with Bury Ditches. Now, access for Burrow Camp, I'm still not 100%. I think there's a bridle way. We didn't find it. But Bury has a car park and signage and even some art and a short way up the hill with some very nice autumn fields. The hill fort itself, these are some of my favourite shots we've ever taken of a hill fort. Just the blend of autumn colours with the mist. It did kind of prevent us from getting very wide shots, but not that that matters. You can see the multi-valley ramparts very nicely, all extremely pleasing to look at. So after this, Clun Castle, maybe Clun Castle, one of those two. A very nice ruin on top of a sizable motte. Once again, while this would have looked gorgeous with some low winter sunshine, the blend of the greens, greys and the rusty autumn tones, irresistible. I actually have to resist the urge to disgorge all of my footage here, as we've got 3 years to get through and extended explainers we are saving for the historic episodes in the future. So a quick lunch from a small cafe in Clun, and then we were on the road and actually dipping into Wales. While anyone with a cursory knowledge of either geography or politics know that despite England and Wales technically being described as nations, there are no tangible borders within Great Britain, just a sign saying, hey. And the squiggle of the boundary between Shropshire and Wales becomes so disorderly, so essentially meaningless in the 21st century, that in many places you cross between the two without knowing, sometimes multiple times in the space of half an hour, depending on your route. In this case, we are in one of the more significant towns on the border. This is Montgomery, and if you take a stroll up the pretty considerable hill above the town, wow, okay, this is Montgomery Castle. While we are inside the borders of modern Wales, this castle was built by the English, or Normans I should perhaps say, debatable either way, as part of the Welsh Marches. It did weather significant assaults from the Welsh forces. All in all, desperately lovely stuff. By the way, this is still part of day 2. We were making pretty good time. Next, this standing stone. Jen laughed at me a little when it turned out that this was what we were driving to. It is barely 8 minutes out of Montgomery, and hey, it has its own info plaque. Not bad going. Being next to an asphalt road didn't help its good looks, but, well, I liked it. Next, and to illustrate what I said about the arbitrary nature of the borders in this part of the world, we had technically crossed back into England for this next bit, but were skimming the Welsh border all the way along this road. I can't help but feel a little silly when you're in England and the Welsh border is to your east. It's like, wait, hang on, how did that happen? Anyway, Mitchell's Fold Stone Circle. There's not the greatest quantity of standing stones in this part of the world, at least not readily accessible or obvious ones. Many of the stones that form Mitchell's Fold are pretty small, apart from a couple which are more like human height. It's one of those funny things about filming stones. Trees, yeah, we know roughly what they look like size-wise, whether they're small or tall trees. Your eye just kind of gives you that information from experience. We also see houses, cars, all this seems very obvious, but stones, when you see those in camera, not in person, they trick your eyes because they could really be any size. I was shocked when I saw the Adam and Eve stones at Avebury, as I thought from pictures these were maybe just knee height, and they're just shy of about 4 meters each. So these smaller stones are harder to pass with your eyes if you've not been and seen them in person. It's a great site to visit, harder to photograph. My shots of this are kind of mid, but it does also have fantastic views to enjoy from its high vantage point. From here, we made an attempt to aim for the Caradoc, but it quickly became clear it was going to be too far and the light was going, so just a glimpse in the distance for now. Well, back to the field with the Hoot Hut. Next day, another early start back to Ludlow. I remembered why I didn't have any footage of our coffee. We were using Costa as a place for breakfast and a bathroom. The outdoor toilet at Hoot was fine, just, cold. Well, a bit more time to enjoy the vibes in Ludlow. Pretty much all of my footage is of the building tops as they were the most photogenic. And the blue skies definitely made it special, and this was the morning we were visiting Ludlow Castle. As you can see, a pretty massive and complex structure. It's one of the more impressive castles we've seen. Our main areas of interest are all pre-1200s, and while a lot of the elements are more recent, there's an impressive amount that survives from its first 100 years in existence. It can actually boast to be one of the first stone castles in England that the Normans built. It was a bulwark as part of a series of fortifications to secure the Welsh border. Most of the sturdy walls of the Inner Bailey are part of these initial Norman work. The biggest tower here likely going up in around the 1140s, as there were fierce struggles for the castle during the Anarchy. It was enough of a major power centre that it actually needed expanding, hence this outer bailey, which was constructed in the mid-1100s, greatly expanding the fortress, particularly of note, this round chapel built inside the Inner Bailey. I do love a round church, and other than some fantastic Romanesque details, probably built thanks to Gilbert de Lacy's Templar links. It's all a pretty great story, which one day, when we get to our Norman episodes, we'll tell properly. Now, I had even more footage of this than I realised, but that was a rush. And now, getting to catch the Shropshire landscape under blue skies, we were heading southwest out of Ludlow and ended up in the small town of Wigmore. Now, nice enough, doesn't look too remarkable. However, if you go past the church and head out of town to the west, you're in for a surprise. Wigmore Castle is massively underrated, not least because it's been left in somewhat more of a wild state, apparently thanks to some bats making their home here. So it really feels like you've stumbled across a hidden fantasy fortress. I saw an article that it was going up for sale a while ago. I'm not actually sure what happened with that, but thankfully, due to its status, whatever happens with ownership, it is remaining open to the public. Anyway, it's still a beautiful anomaly of a significant castle that nature has partly reclaimed, but that you can still explore. It feels like a great little secret find, despite being modestly well known. Okay, well, rather than heading south and towards home just yet, we still had some significant unfinished business. It was back up to Church Stretton and up the Caradoc. Now, knowing the area better now, we had parked a little way far off to the south. If you do try and drive the roads much closer, you'll probably just find yourself on these private-ish, narrow avenues that have no parking or really a turning circle or anything. Closer parking would be in the houses on the edge of town. They might not thank me for that, but look, it's hardly going to be thousands of cars showing up to scale the Caradoc at any one time. Not scrambling up a cliff face, obviously you don't need to pack your ice axe, but the slope on the southwestern side is sheer. But you are richly rewarded for your effort. The views over the town and the surrounding landscape are breathtaking if you had any breath left to take. The fort itself is a beast. It appears to be just operating on a completely different scale to many of the other forts we visit. Just the height and width of the ramparts, you can see in places that the natural rock has provided more than adequate defence. Its name is derived from Caratacus, a leader of a protracted resistance to the Roman conquest of Britain, but we're pretty confident that this is not the site of his famous defeat, as it doesn't appear to match the description given by Tacitus. So this was an exhausting but incredibly satisfying thing to do. I have been meaning to go back on a day when the conditions were fine. I nearly managed last year, but in the end, with limited time, I passed it up for a chance to catch the sunset at British Camp, which turned out to be a very good call. I will be back up there at some point. But with that completed, it was just a few other bits as we started the return journey south. A quick look at Caneham Camp, just outside Ludlow, then just a little last-minute church calling. First, the gorgeous St John the Baptist in the small town of Hope Bagot. There's just too many nice details here, from the rickety wooden porch, to the chancel arch, to the Norman windows. Yeah, beautiful stuff. And then just down the road, St Michael and All Angels in Knighton-on-Thames, sadly locked, but the Romanesque door was a treat. So this made for a perfect end to the trip. It's basic, but I still really like this shot. So, it's probably obvious to all of you how we caught the bug for this, and no surprise then that we returned to do kind of similar the following autumn. This came just after a trip to Ravenna. This was really special, but the episode landed, that time when the platform decided it just didn't feel like showing our stuff to hardly anyone. Thanks YouTube. No, don't trouble yourself, it's all good. So do load that up for afters, but coming off the plane back into the UK, I had been a little on the ill side. It was weird because it wasn't a constant like cold or flu. At times I was feeling pretty good while zigzagging through the streets of Venice, but I was finding myself getting unaccountably exhausted and I was coughing a fair bit. Well, once again, we were heading from Bournemouth, and actually, once again, we went via Cirencester to catch a few bits we hadn't seen the previous year. There's this little fragment of Roman wall to the north of the town, and there's scarcely anything of the abbey that once stood in Cirencester apart from a park named after it, but the gatehouse from the 1100s is still intact, and that's something. Well, we're in Gloucestershire, so I don't mind showing you a little bit more of what we got up to, even though we're still a ways off Shropshire. First of all, this pretty tiny church in a little hamlet called Duntisbourne Rouse. And while it's only traces of it, this church has a Saxon foundation, and some of the 1,000-year-old herringbone masonry is still visible on the outer walls. It also has a very nice Norman chancel arch. The tower is adorably small, a little later from the 1400s. Next, just outside the town of Bourton on the Water, there is a hill fort at Salmonsbury, but it's not especially clear. I hadn't actually clocked that there were ditches and banks surviving, but you can barely just make them out here. You do, however, have this rather lovely recreated roundhouse, which was nice to see. Bourton on the Water is a bit of a funny microcosm, but for whatever reason at the time, I didn't actually get any footage. Next, we're in the part of the county that is rich in long barrows. We'd caught some of these before, but it was good to see a handful more. They survive in differing conditions. Many were excavated by antiquarians who just wrecked them and then packed up and left. So it's really only the ones that have been restored or left alone that still stand in reasonable shape. Knott Grove Long Barrow, for example, you can see, not looking its best. I'm not sure I mentioned, to those who don't know, these are generally Neolithic, so ballpark, 5,000 years old, which makes it all the more dispiriting to see them get wrecked in only the last 200 years. Knott Grove Long Barrow mainly made me laugh because it appears to presuppose the existence of a Grove Long Barrow. Well, to give you an idea of one that has had some love and attention, though is much more of a mish to reach, head up the hill for a while and you get to Belus Knapp. This may be the finest example of its type. Again, it needed restoration, but it otherwise has survived down to us as a modest approximation of how one was originally put together. It's a bit of a puzzle because, for example, this entrance portal, which the whole monument seems to be drawing you to, is a false entrance. There is nothing behind there, and it's not clear why. Around the edge of the monument, you do have 4 chambers cut. It was restored after another round of excavations at the end of the 1920s. It's just a pretty incredible place. I put this in my list of top 9 underrated ancient sites. You can have a watch of that later. Yeah, by the way, please help us out with a subscribe. You'll see that there's a lot more of this stuff going up on the channel. I've already mentioned the Hill Forts episodes. Not only is there a massive playlist of those you can catch, but later in the year, we're going to be circling back when we finally do the Shropshire Hill Forts episode. That's going to be massive. But yeah, you just be really helping us out. You know, I hate to say it, but if you don't hit the bell, the platform just often doesn't show our episodes to people. It's mad. We've doubled our sub count in the last year, but you get episodes that only have maybe 100 or 200 views. It makes it pretty clear the platform is just preferentially not showing our stuff to people who would otherwise be interested. So yeah, you've probably got to hit the bell to actually be in with a chance of seeing what we're up to. I hadn't been getting much footage from the road, and so far, so Cotswolds, but not to spend too much of our runtime there, just one more treat for what had turned into a lovely day. This is Hales Abbey. Now, you know us, we do love a ruined abbey, and boy did the 1500s furnish us in the UK with plenty of those. It took some trial and error, but the combination of the blue skies and the autumn colours really made this incredibly pretty. One day in the not too distant future, we'll have a series on the ruined monastic sites and we'll get to run you through all of these. With that, we still had a fair amount of road to cover. I'll just come clean. In some places, I'm having to borrow road footage from various previous trips. So if you know the area really well, you can start Leonardo DiCaprio pointing whenever the road on screen doesn't technically make sense for what we're doing. In fact, after dark, I'm normally camera down to relax. So if we cut to the next morning, this is what we were sleeping in. It was less cozy than the Hoot Hut from the previous year. It didn't seem to be listed that year for some reason, so we couldn't book it. But yes, another shepherd's hut. This was just below the Wenlock Edge, one of the several parallel ridgelines that run for many miles on a sort of northeast-southwest heading. You can see the mist was back, but in the best way possible. Well, this time, we were just a short drive from Church Stretton. Church Stretton, if you recall, is the town overlooked by the Caradoc. It's nice. It doesn't quite have that Cotswolds chic, say, but it did have this fantastic coffee spot, which did somewhat make my day. We did stop in Wroxeter and pardon me, I've just realised I need to stop everything dead to explain something. If I don't put this here, people are going to think that we're just the biggest idiots, especially knowing the sort of things that we're into. So before all of these trips, and in the rather confusing time of the plague years, a group of us were hoping to stretch our legs and see some of North Wales. Now, as far as applicable laws at the time, this was fine, but for people sleeping in Wales from different households, that was not legal at that stage. But curiously, staying in a house in Basschurch, just over the border, that was legal. So we were in this funny position of shuttling back and forth between the nations for a few days. We had a great time in Wales, but while we were at it, we did see some of the following, which are kind of must-visit places in the north of Shropshire. So Wroxeter, we did get some proper time doing this. I think people would find it unconscionable if I'm talking about all these ancient places in Shropshire, yet leaving out one of the most significant Roman sites in Britain. We saw Old Oswestry, though at the time I failed to grasp just how big it is, hence not getting nearly wide enough to fit it all in frame, something I would rectify years later. There is also a quartet of ruined abbeys, all within pretty short distance of each other in this loose orbit around Shrewsbury. There's Lealshall Abbey, there's Buildwas with its incredibly solid Romanesque pillars, then Homond Abbey, which is surprisingly extensive with a lot of really nice detail, and finally Much Wenlock with its famous and rather fabulous blind arcading and just generally lovely details all round. We did catch the middle of Shrewsbury, but this is still on the list as somewhere I need to take more time. I did briefly see the Abbey, haven't got around to the castle yet, but it's not exactly in its original condition, so you can see how we prefer to be spending time around places like this, or this. So this is sort of the missing piece as to why some of the things in kind of the north of Shropshire, including, the county town and various spots you might assume would be the first places we go, well, we ticked those off before, though we would also love a revisit, perhaps, if blue skies allow. Okay, well, sorry to grind things to a halt, but that is why we didn't take too much time at Wroxeter, though we did get a first look at the pre-conquest church just beyond the archaeological site. The oldest part of the church is this portion at the east end. Apart from this curious, now blocked Romanesque portal, hey, boys, those stones are all a bit irregular. How did you come by this stone? You have some sort of nearby source for that? Nah, it's fine. I'm sure it's all above board. You guys seem cool. I mean, this font does look a bit like a Roman pillar. I'm sure that's just some other thing. Ditto those by the gate. It's fine. Yes, I know this was business as usual for Saxon churches. Spoiler alert. Little gag for the Arch fans out there. The problem I have is we already have a recurring
spoilers from history
gag. So it feels like a second wordplay on spoiler is kind of overdoing it. Okay, so brief revisit of Rockster. The next big target, this is the Wrekin. And for all the mist this morning, you can still see the blue sky, so I was modestly optimistic that this was going to clear. This is a beast of a hill with an enclosure at the top. Now, I like moody shots. If anything, this Grey Days series is something I'm doing precisely because I'm in the habit of only filming under blue skies, which is making all of my footage start to look similar. But there's moody and there's being completely unable to see. Guess which category the actual fort at the top of the hill was falling into. While this is an unbelievably popular spot, I don't think I've ever seen a steep hill like this that gets so many people walking, dog walking, and even cycling. I don't think anyone that's climbed the Wrekin would begrudge me saying this. It is a mish. And this was the point at which I realised I was really not in good health. It's one thing to be a bit out of breath after a hill climb, but I was practically catatonic over lunch, hence not filming. So not much luck seeing the Wrekin, just wrecking myself in the most obvious wordplay. I have since been back to get a proper look at the Wrekin, so here's 4 frames of that. Anyway, not wanting to abandon the day, we carried on, and it's a not inconsiderable drive when you're trying to go on an east-west axis across Shropshire. We ended up at Caer Caradoc, but no, not the one we've already seen. There's a number of sites named after Caratacus, and this is just another Shropshire hill fort that also calls itself Caer Caradoc, and it's awesome, actually. I'm just thinking back to our episode with Toby Driver. Maybe that should be Caer Caradoc. That would be the more Welsh way to say it, at least, but yeah, there it is. It's above the tiny village of Chapel Lawn. The walk up was gentler than the Wrekin, though that's like saying a cup of chamomile tea is gentler than submerging your head into a bucket of absinthe. And not only gorgeous views over the Shropshire countryside, but really well-defined ditches and banks. We'll save the further details for our hill fort episode on Shropshire, which you can probably tell is going to be a big one. Next, a couple of churches on the way. This is St Peter's, Stanton Lacey. You can see this rather nice Saxon work on the exterior wall alongside this small Saxon doorway. Most of the fabric of the building is not as old, with some nice pre-conquest stonework. And this was really nice. A drive down some extremely tight lanes later. This is Heath Chapel. It's small, but with a nice Romanesque portal. You have to solve a complex riddle to enter, but if you roll high on your perception check, you might just be able to unlock the the chapel. And a nice font, the chancel arch looking good despite the whitewash, which also appears to be hiding some medieval art. I realise I've got into the habit of presenting all the things we're seeing as if it is self-evident why you'd be interested in them, while on the one hand, any particular beautiful stonework or a curious feature might not need that much explaining. And I think that encountering structures 800, 1,000, even 2, 3 or 5,000 years old is also sufficiently novel that a general audience would understand how that's more interesting than simply a Victorian church that's not even tipped over 200 years old. But you might be wondering why I'm so enthused about this rather plain-looking church instead of, picking one at random, this, which we've not been in. Well, apart from the fact that we have a few million of these in the UK, give or take 1 or 2 million, this is all the result of later work. Many pre-conquest and Romanesque churches were originally this bit, and then later a much larger nave was stuck on the back. But if you want to see what a rural church would have looked like from ballpark 900 years ago, this is much closer. Not this, nor this, this. And close by, this was an amazing way to cap off the day, Nordy Bank Hill Fort. And for all the mist we'd had, the sun really came through on this one to light up the autumn colours on the hillside. Let's just take a second to run more of this. So that was lovely. Well, an uneventful night, and we were off in the morning to make some progress south, and we are out of Shropshire, but this is one of my absolute favourite places. This is Great Malvern. I had stayed here a couple of nights with my folks a little while ago. That didn't become an episode, you haven't missed anything, but man, this place just feels incredible. And beyond this, the Malvern Hills are just such an exquisite place. They loom up for miles before you even reach them, and when you do, they shelve up suddenly above the Severn Valley below. And yes, there's gorgeous Romanesque work in the Priory. Had a great coffee at Abbey Road, really good spot there. We also went up British Camp, a second attempt after a rather cloudy first attempt a couple of years previous. The light is still not massively working for us. It was a funny mix. The sun was lighting up the hill well now and then, but the cloud to the south was still sucking out all the colour. We have since done a better job of that, so here's 4 frames of that with a recording of Ed Miliband. Onwards, and we were only just barely still within Gloucestershire, but it's just time to see St Swithun's, and it's 2 incredible doorways. Yes, these are ridiculously well preserved for their age. And that was year 2, punctuated by feeling drained, but, still also pretty great from the things we got to catch. Well, year 3. Now, this year we decided to get a bigger crowd along. Oh, and by this time we had Weasel with us. Just to confirm, that is a term of endearment. I'm trying to source a Weasel-themed onesie, but that has been challenging. We might just have to settle for Pine Martin. Oh, and on the way, Kudos Coffee. Got to be done. This is Whitchurch. It's a long way off our target, but I can just never stop shouting these guys out if you're heading up the A34. It was a funny mix this day. We caught Royal Camp, which is back in Gloucestershire, and the Cotswolds again. I'm not sure if these are archaeological features. I initially got excited because I thought they were hut circles, but their edges might be too irregular. I'm not sure. There's an interesting contrast between the Cotswolds and Shropshire. The Cotswolds are a hilariously ill-defined area. I mean, the map on the wiki looks like this, which is somehow both exceptionally specific and non-specific at the same time. I mean, just on a human level, I think the idea is more that you're supposed to know it when you see it, something like that. But more than that, the Cotswolds are famous for adorning magazine covers, and probably 3/4 of those are just various angles of Castle Combe. It is expected to be very raw, with price points to match, which is fine if it's just a macchiato that's $3.50, but more of a problem for things like accommodation or any sort of dinner further up than a Tesco's meal deal. I'm not down on the place. I mean, Bradford-on-Avon, Stow-on-the-Wold, yes, Castle Combe, these are all very nice. We are exceptionally lucky that some of our friends who have joined us for adventures here and there live in Malmesbury, so we've been so lucky to see more of that over the years. But rather than not being happy to see the Cotswolds, I can't shake the feeling that the Cotswolds are not that happy to see us. We're not really in the right price bracket, we're not in the nice restaurants or the boutique B&Bs at £200 a night, which makes us just part of the crowds that begin to swell in these otherwise quite tight choke points, where the charm of the narrow streets becomes the nuisance of too many of us trying to fit down them at once. Shropshire, on the other hand, is less so the darling of the English tourism press. That might be because Londoners can't get there on the M4 in under 2 hours. What that ends up looking like is constantly being told that Shropshire is the next big undiscovered English gem, and lower prices than the Cotswolds are an incentive. Look, it's all good. All of this is all basically brilliant. And there is just a ton of space here where there's very few people, but still ample places to get a room for the night, if you don't mind the nearest coffee shop being about maybe a 30-40 minute drive away. Later in this series, we took a brief winter break around Bilth Wells and this part of Wales, essentially just due west of all the Shropshire stuff we're doing. And, well, yes, as you'll see, it was all gorgeous, but really not pricey. Okay, we're veering away from Shropshire again. Just a couple before we get across the border, we stopped at Elmley Castle, which is a really pleasant little village that I unaccountably didn't photograph on this occasion. After a bit of a walk up the hill behind the town, you can see the Norman castle from which the town takes its name. We had planned on going further to catch Bredon Hill, but time and carrying a baby did not really allow us to go further and higher. We briefly saw a church that wasn't open, but I have also just lost. I do not know where this is, and I can't seem to find it on the map now. Anyone want to shout out in the comments where this church with a nice Romanesque door and a timber frame building opposite is? I think I was there to see a font, but it was locked, so oh well. Okay, this drive was actually just Jen and Weasel and I, as our friends were joining us the next day. We were staying in Wrexham for the night, which is just overshooting Shropshire by a pinch. I had particularly relished the chance to get up early and head to the Clwydian Hills to see... Ugh, damn it. Yeah, if you're seeing a slight pattern here, autumn may bring out the beautiful colours around hill forts, but it also brings mist. Usually just a bit more than you'd want. Occasionally this would clear just a little and we'd get a cool shot, but otherwise some rather oblique shots of Mole Arthur and not much better luck with Foal Fenley. Well, too bad. After heading back and getting breakfast, we did dip into Shropshire and Oswestry. Just before we got into town, Castle Brogintin. I actually had this wrong. It is very small for a hill fort, and yes, this was actually a Welsh castle, and very nice it is too, with all the autumnal trees around it looking like a snack. Then went into Oswestry. Not actually seen the town before. Some nice, part timbered buildings, but particularly wanted to see the motte. While surrounded by the town, it's been kept pretty nicely. There's even some masonry surviving at the top. We needed to make up some distance south, so heading down a little ways, a quick one at St. Peter's, Diddlebury. I mean, find me a more English-sounding village, really.
Well, yes, it was very nice. We undertook a minor perambulation of sorts to Diddlebury.
Well, some very interesting pre-conquest work there, if you know what to look for. As you are no doubt seeing, the weather was pretty glum. So ridiculous that it may seem, as narratively the day only started fewer than 3 minutes ago, we were already losing the light as it came to 3 o'clock. In previous years, this final weekend of the October half-term had landed before the clocks changed, but this year, no such luck. As such, if it's a cloudy day, you really lose the good filming light as it gets past 2:30 p.m. Yeah, it seems ridiculous, but there it is. So just caught this motte, and we were heading to our accommodation, which was actually just over the border into Wales. I'm counting on people to forgive us for dancing around Shropshire so much while technically being in other counties or countries, but yes, Grade 2 listed this house is most certainly not, but it was nice inside, and if you've ever booked accommodation in this part of the world, you'll know that the Welsh border represents about an instant 30% discount. For the sake of 10 to 20 miles, the prices are way lower than the equivalent over the functionally meaningless English border. So good times were had, though footage was not taken. I mean, that's kind of what quality time with your friends and family should look like, right? Yeah, cameras away. Next morning, got folks into Ludlow for a coffee and a look around. Bit of a drive from our accommodation, but for the price, yeah, sure. Think everyone in agreement, yeah, this was all very lovely. I had got everyone out here with the promise of good walks. So with everyone coffeeed up, a little way northwest and very much a land that phone signal forgot, I briefly jogged ahead to catch this Norman church with an incredibly stocky tower. This is the village of Hopesay, and above it, you might recall our failure to catch Burrow Camp. Well, it appears we still didn't do this quite right. The trail we followed, it wasn't clear if there was a right-of-way. We did bump into an older guy in the woods who seemed a little surprised to see us. He asked if we were the archery group, which we were not. He didn't protest, he just did intimate that we were off the public trail, but was perfectly nice about it, so I'm still a little unsure. Maybe the bridleway that starts a long way to the south is the only sanctioned way, but yeah, this is Burrow Camp, and wow, I mean, just beautifully preserved multivallate banks and ditches to an impressive degree. As the crow flies, we're only a couple of miles to the east of Bury Ditches, and while Burrow is more teardrop-shaped, hard not to see a link between the two. We had a nice enough walk in the woods, which, yeah, were looking good enough to eat. I mean, Shropshire in autumn, everyone. Still need convincing? From there, we headed a little further north, just outside Church Stretton, but not to drag everyone up the Caradoc, which I had considered, instead heading west out of town to Carding Mill. Now, while I judiciously frame humans out of my shots wherever possible, I was shocked at how busy this was. It's actually a National Trust spot, and we barely just got spaces between us. Starting off in the valley floor next to this river, the hills quickly get spectacular, but after walking up this rocky spine, we were level with Bodbury Ring. Now, we're in clear line of sight with the Caradoc, but while Bodbury Ring seems pretty diminutive by comparison, there was recently a big dig here, and as it turns out, originally this had a much larger footprint that's no longer visible on the surface. So, great views, feeling good. Quickly got everyone coffee, just like the day before. Even though it was only 1 p.m, I could already feel the finite daylight snapping at my heels. So dropping a couple of smaller things off the list and heading away north, over the border into Wales, it was just north of Llangollen to Castle Dinas Bran. Do you have to, like both of the double L's in Llangollen? Llangollen, maybe? Yeah. In that previous trip we mentioned when we were driving in and out of Wales, we kept passing this and we didn't get time for it in the end, but what a place! This is a Welsh castle built within what had formerly been an Iron Age hill fort on a major high point above the valley below. It would just be rude not to have a hill fort up here. I mean, it's just high enough without being mountain high, and it commands the landscape around it. As you can see, there's also the ruins of the castle, and yes, Welsh castles, not castles in Wales, parentheses, built by the English to oppress the Welsh, but castles built by the Welsh themselves are far more rare. And while this hasn't survived to, say, Carnarvon levels, it's still a gorgeous ruin to take in, which everyone seemed to enjoy. Yeah, need a little more of this. As you can see, that was the last of the light. Not even time to nip round the corner to Valle Crucis. But you've seen how this works. That's just a job for another year. A good night spent together. I snuck out early. Our accommodation was kind of close to Montgomery and I had unfinished business. The precursor to the castle on the hill was this motte, just to the north of the current town. This is Hendemen. And then arguably the precursor to even both of those, even higher up than the castle, this is Friedfaldwin, and for a change, the good type of mist where it adds to the mood, but you can still get the wide shots. I actually need to get back to Montgomery at some point. Some of the castle town walls below the castle have survived pretty well. So, scooping up the rest of the gang, we headed just slightly beyond Church Stretton. The ridge containing the Caradoc, also known as the Lawley, has a quite slight enclosure partway up, but it's just generally a spectacular place, and despite its height, you gain altitude pretty gently. While it was great, it was at least not rainy or excessively windy. While it was still a little ways away, I think this is it in the distance. I had another hillfall I really wanted to catch before home time. It was another essentially vertical ascent that the camera entirely fails to capture, but at the top, Earl's Hill. Yes, nom, thank you. Beautiful, and the display from the trees, amazing. We did dip into Church Stretton for a coffee, but the good place was closed on Sundays, and the rest of the coffee lacks, care, let's say. Well, no matter, on our way, and just to break up the drive, with the last of the light we dropped in on Ledbury, which is an absolute paradise for old timbered buildings. Quick coffee, lost the light, and drive back. So yeah, there it is, bit of a long anthology episode, I know. Going back to the footage, I was shocked at how little interstitial footage I'd taken of driving or coffees, etc. So if you saw an anomaly, you don't have to be all J'accuse! I just had to borrow from the rest of our library to illustrate things. But of all the things you could accuse us of, lacking enthusiasm for Shropshire and the Welsh Marches in general is not one of them. We're arguably 6 or even 7 trips deep to this part of the world, and I'm still impatient to get back and see more. If we plot all of this on a map, this is most of what we've seen, and we've since improved on this. Our trip from this autumn just gone is an episode for another time. Now, we're going to explain this properly next time because, given the choice, I would infinitely prefer to be filming on blue sky days rather than grey days, but that does mean that you can end up just kind of feeling like November to March is all dead time. And since we're often not feeling especially great during the winter, I kind of wanted to go about things a little bit differently. So we'll explain what's up with this series a bit more next time. If you've been enjoying the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes and you can catch it all on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, you can catch us on Blue Sky where we're posting a bit more regularly. These episodes often take something like 20, 30 hours to put together. So, that's why there's such a backlog in what we're doing. So yeah, find us on Blue Sky and otherwise we'll catch you very soon.